Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach once again. It's good to be back here on the Bima. You know, I was just thinking when I was standing in front of the Ark that the last time we were here for a service, I'm not talking about for like a bar mitzvah or something like that, but for an actual service, I believe was Yom Kippur. I think it was Ne'ilah. It was the last service we had here as a service. So it's really wonderful to be here. And you know, on Pesach as well, when you think about it, throwing off the bondage, perhaps, would tie something in there a little bit, and being free a little bit more here in the, in the sanctuary is beautiful. And seeing you here, each and every one of you, thank you for being here. And thank you for those who are joining us online as well. And you know, talking about sort of Pesach, for our fellow Jews in Israel, today is the last day of Pesach. They will be reciting Yizkor, which we're going to be reciting tomorrow. They'll be reciting it today. And when Shabbat goes out tonight, they will retake possession of the chametz, and then they're going to go out and they're going to enjoy pizza and beer. Jews of North African heritage in Israel will be celebrating Mimuna, which is a special holiday at the end of Passover, marking the return of eating chametz. I mean, Gewalt, you've been away for chametz for 7 days, and they have to have a special service and a special ceremony for eating chametz again. Then they'll do so with mofletas, which is a sort of a flat donut, while they're eating pizza and donuts. And as they're doing that, we will still be eating matzah for another day. And then we'll be back in shul here tomorrow for Yizkor, doing exactly what we're doing today. I don't know about you, but as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't seem quite fair. It doesn't. Some people have described the second day of Chag, of the festival, as a kind of tax that we have to pay for choosing to live outside of Israel. But the real reason we have 2 days of Chag outside of Israel, they only have 1 day, is much more complicated than that. The Jewish calendar is a Metonic calendar, which means it's a solar-corrected lunar calendar. And with a lunar calendar, the new month always starts on the first day of the new moon, which is also why, to keep the Jewish calendar synchronized with the seasons, we cannot add leap days as we do on the secular calendar. You know, February 28th, 29th, you know this. But we can only add leap months, which is why our holidays are always shifting compared to the secular calendar. And back in the days of the temple, and for a few hundred years even after the destruction of the second temple, the date of Rosh Chodesh, the start of a new month, was determined by witnesses who spotted the appearance of the new moon, and they came running to Jerusalem, to the Beit Din, the rabbinic court in Jerusalem. They said to them, "We saw the new moon." The lunar month is approximately 29 and a half days long, which means Rosh Chodesh will always be either the 29th day or the 30th day after the last new moon. So imagine, somebody comes running to Jerusalem, he says, "Yesterday I saw the new moon." And so the Beit Din there, they sort of listen to what he has to say, they ask him a few questions, and they start doing their calculations, and they start calculating when the next Rosh Chodesh is going to be, and therefore they can set the calendar. Within Israel, imagine just at that period, within Israel, they could send messengers very easily to let communities outside of Jerusalem know it was Rosh Chodesh. But how would the Jews outside of Israel know? They didn't have emails in those days. Messengers would take too long to get there before there was a holiday. And for many years, the only major community outside of Israel was located in Bavel, in Babylonia, what we know today as modern-day Iraq. For many years, there was a system of signal fires which would be used to transmit the timing of the new month from Israel to Bavel. And when the new moon was spotted, that night they would light a bonfire on a mountain in Jerusalem, which could then be seen for miles and miles away, to another mountain where they would light another fire, and so and so and so and so until it got to where it had to go, telling everybody that it was Rosh Chodesh. If there was no fire, the people in Bavel knew Rosh Chodesh was on the 30th, and there was no need to light a fire the following night to convey the information, since there was no other option. Everything was fine until a sect known as the Beitusim came along, and they disagreed with the rabbis over the counting of the Omer. I mean, do we ever disagree as Jews? When do we ever disagree? The counting of the Omer determines the holiday of when the holiday of the Shavuot is going to fall. It's the 50th day of the count. The verse in the Torah that gives us the commandment to count 49 days. And when do we start it from? We start it from the second night of Pesach, right? But what does the Torah say? The Torah says, "Usfatim lachem imocharat Shabbat," and from the day of which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day of the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks, 7 full weeks. That's what the Torah tells us. So the rabbis understand Shabbat in this context as referring to the holiday itself, i.e., the Torah tells us the first day of Pesach, that is the Shabbat. So they understood it to mean the second night of Passover. And that's why we start counting the Omer on the second day of Passover. But the Beitusim, on the other hand, said no. No, that's not what the Torah says. The Torah doesn't say Yom Tov, it says Shabbos. Which means the counting of the Omer should begin on the first Sunday after Passover. And therefore Shavuot will always be on a Sunday. They felt the rabbi's approach violated the Torah because it would on occasion require harvesting the Shavuot grain on Shabbat. And in order to make at least the observance of the Babylonians to be in accordance with their calendar, they occasionally lit signal fires on the wrong night. We thought we had sorrows here with the other communities, but they had big sorrows. And as a result, the Jews of Babylonia were observing Shavuot on the wrong day. And the rabbis decreed, therefore, that the Jews in Babylonia must observe Rosh Chodesh on both days. And that way they could they would at least be observing it on one of the correct days, the 29th and the 30th. And the other major holidays, other than Yom Kippur, were also observed on both days, so there could be no wrong day that it would be observed. None of the pilgrimage festivals fall on the first day of the month. The earliest is Shavuot on the 6th day of the month. Pesach and Sukkot are both celebrated on the 15th of the month. Within Israel, messengers could let everybody know which day was really Pesach. Outside of Israel, well, messengers wouldn't arrive in time, so they celebrated all the holidays on both days. And that leaves us today outside Israel with 2 Seders and 8 days of matzah. The last day of Passover is actually the second day of the 7th day, which is actually the holiday. So today is the actual holiday, tomorrow isn't. This also explains why Rosh Hashanah is observed for 2 days in Israel. Because even within Israel, there would not have been time to let everybody know it was Rosh Hashanah, since it starts on the first day of the month. Now, in the 4th century, the Jewish community in Israel was very weak. It was very weak because of persecution, and the Beit Din had trouble functioning. It was already well known at that point how to calculate the length of the lunar month. So from that time on, a fixed calendar was adopted. We no longer look at the sky to figure out when there's a new moon. We look in a calculated calendar. And the rabbis sometimes push Rosh Chodesh a day forward or a day backwards to avoid having Yom Kippur fall on either a Friday or a Sunday. If you notice, Yom Kippur can never fall on a Friday or a Sunday because the rabbis manipulate the calendar. If the calendar is fixed by calculation, and Jews all over the world know exactly which day is Rosh Chodesh and which day is Passover, why do we still here have to celebrate then 2 days of the holiday here in Montreal, while in Jerusalem they only mark 1 day? I've got to tell you what's happening in some of the Jewish communities, the Orthodox communities in Europe. It's very interesting. I heard this from a colleague of mine. There are rabbis in Israel who have proclaimed that if people that live outside of Israel, if they own a holiday home in Israel, whenever they come to Israel to observe the festival, they only have to keep the days that are observed in Israel. Sounds good, right? I mean, if I'm there in Israel, I should only keep 1 day, right? Great. Now picture this as what's happening in some of the Orthodox communities in Europe. You know, let's say England for argument's sake. It's 3.5 hours flight from London to Tel Aviv. 3, maybe 4 hours max. So people fly backwards and forwards all the time. They have holiday homes there. So in one of the very Orthodox communities in London, this is what's occurring. Family will fly to Israel for Pesach. On the 7th day, which is the Yom Tov in Israel, and it's the first day of the 2 days in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, at the end of that 7th day, or early on what would be the 8th day for us, they fly back to London. And then they drive from the airport to their home, and some of them then go into the office while their neighbors are coming out of shul because it's Yom Tov. It's become an absolute joke in some of these communities, where you've got some neighbors who are equally observant, who are going to work on the last day of Yom Tov, while their neighbors are observing fastidiously Yom Tov. And this is particularly true when it comes to Pesach, because think about it, the 8th day would not be a Yom Tov for them, because they were in Israel, they just arrived back. They can go and have chametz, where their neighbors cannot have chametz, they have to have matzah. It's ridiculous. So, why do we still do this? And the reason is because Maimonides said it's because it's what's called minhag avotenu, which means the custom of our ancestors, and we continue to follow that custom even though there is no longer any real need. Because Jews all over the world know the proper date. Is minhag avotenu a good enough reason? Or has the time come to abolish the 2nd day of the Chag outside of Israel? Minhag avotenu is the only reason that I can think of to keep the 2nd day. On the other hand, there are many arguments in favor of abolishing it. And first of all, most of us, I don't know about you, but I can only speak about me and my family, we're no longer agricultural workers who have a very relaxed and flexible work schedule. Most people do not have enough vacation time to easily take off 2 days at the beginning of Yom Tov, 2 days at the end of Yom Tov. If you add them up, if you add those days up, as many as 13 vacation days a year. I have people that go through my conversion program who are required to keep Shabbos and Yom Tov, and all of a sudden they find that their 2 weeks or their 3 weeks is taken up just observing the festivals. When the rabbis outside of Israel decided to observe Yizkor on the 2nd day of the 2 possible days, it was because the first day, as in today, the 7th day of Passover, was biblically the actual day of the holiday. So of course, people would come to shul anyway. But the rabbis were clever. They said perhaps they're going to need a little bit of encouragement to come on the next day. So what did the rabbis do in Ashkenazic communities? They put in Yizkor on the 2nd day. That way they knew that people would show up. And I can tell you it worked. Because when I see the numbers on Yizkor compared to Other days, it worked. The irony, of course, that since people don't have so much vacation time, what actually happens is many people are now ignoring the 7th day and are coming just for Yizkor on the 8th day, which is not even the actual day of the holiday. And this seems like a potential violation of the principle Lifnei Iver lo titein mishchol, which means you do not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. In other words, we are encouraging people to come on the day that is not the holiday, and they neglect the day that is the holiday. If we look back to the origins of the 2 days of the holidays in Galut, which is the exile, it's quite clear that if the rabbis had telephones, and even if they had telegraphs, some form of instantaneous communications, there never would have been a time when 2 days were observed anywhere. The second day was instituted to solve a specific problem we no longer have, so it's no longer needed. And there's yet another rationale, which was used in some halachic opinions from the conservative rabbis in the late 60s. After the 6-day war, now that Jews once again have control of Eretz Yisrael, of the land of Israel, shouldn't Jews all over the world observe the same calendar as a statement of solidarity with our brethren in Israel? Minhag Avotenu is an important principle. Old habits die hard, and it's very powerful to feel connected to the traditions of our ancestors. We all do it. But maybe it's time to give up on this custom, which is a great burden to the community that most people don't follow anyway. You know, I'm reminded of the story about a woman who always cuts the end off the brisket. You know the story about the brisket, the woman, the brisket? She always cut off the end of the brisket before putting it in the pot to cook it for the Seder night. And one year, her son's fiancé said to her, well, why do you cut the ends off the brisket and put it on the top of the thing? She said, I don't know, it's what my mother did. So she said, let's go and ask Grandma. So they go over to the retirement home where the grandma's living, and they say, Grandma, we have a question. Why did you used to cut off the ends of the briskets and put it on top before putting it in the oven? And she said, well, the reason that we did that because the pot was too small for the brisket. And if I didn't cut the ends off, it wouldn't fit. So you see how customs can evolve. Okay? And I wonder if the rabbis who decreed 2 days of holidays for those living in the galut, in the exile, would be equally astonished to know that Jews around the world are still following that custom despite the fact that we have a fixed calendar and instantaneous communications. I can communicate with Israel in a matter of seconds. We know exactly when the new moon is. We know exactly when Yom Tov begins. I think you'll agree with me that perhaps the time has come that we reassess this additional day of Yom Tov. Saying that, I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow for Yizkor. Don't be late. In the meantime, we're going to turn in our Sidurim